Okay, if you could please get started. We're trying to get a lot done this morning and this afternoon. We are now going to have the candidates for the county attorney's race. I would like to introduce Lando Voyles, who is from Maricopa, the prosecuting attorney. He's running for county attorney. And James Walsh is our current county attorney in Pinal County. And Adam will be honoring this one and pass the last interview for a bit. Thank you.
We're going to get started with the first question, and we're going to start with Mr. Voyles. And the question I'd like to ask for you, sir, is how do you view a good relationship, good working relationship between the county attorney's office and the Pinal County Sheriff's Office?
That's a great question, actually. So the working relationship, they're both in the executive branch of government. So the best working relationship is to, when a case gets submitted to the county attorney's office, the county attorney's office is going to review it. That's their job. As opposed to just shutting it down and sending it back without giving an explanation as to why they're turning it down. A good working relationship is to go back to the sheriff's office and say, look, this is the reasons why I'm turning this down. This is what's happening. This is what happened in this case. This is what we need in the next case. If it's going to be furthered and you need to further the case, three things the county attorney can do is either accept it, to charge it, turn it down, or further it for further investigations. If you go back and you work with them on that to help them understand why it is you're turning a case down or why it is you're furthering the case, you have a better working relationship than just turning back around, dismissing cases one after another, and refusing to prosecute. Now, if you don't have this, you're butting heads on everything from there on out. If the officers or deputies need to be trained on specific issues, county attorneys should go out there and actually train them. They can actually go out there and have seminars where they actually train the deputies. That's a good working relationship. As opposed to waiting for the cases to come to them, shutting them down, and saying, we're not even going to talk to you about it. Thank you.
Mr. Walsh, the same question goes to you. How do you view a good working relationship between the county attorney's office and the Pinal County Sheriff's Office?
Good working relationship requires three aspects. It needs to be professional, it needs to be collaborative, and it needs to be cooperative. On the law enforcement side, it needs to be professional. The sheriff and the deputies in that office and our office are professionals. We're in the same business together. We're protecting you, your families, your property from crime. We have our roles to play within the system. The sheriff gathers evidence. We review it. We decide what we charge. We need to be in touch with each other. We need to work together. That's collaboration. And we do it. We do it right now. Many of, probably close to the majority of our cases that are charged and prosecuted come from the sheriff's office. Although there may be some disagreement between the sheriff and me on many political areas, on the area of law enforcement, my deputies work with his deputies overwhelmingly cooperatively and collaboratively on the cases we have. We need to be cooperative. We need to make sure that we work together. We have two other relationships that are important that I don't have with other law enforcement agencies. The sheriff and the sheriff's office is also a client of our office because we do civil representation. So we need to work closely with the sheriff's office on HR issues, on other issues that have to do with civil work. And the sheriff, as other law enforcement, sends a RICO request through my office. Statutes say that I must review it. And so we have a relationship on that area. Still needs to be professional, collaborative, and cooperative. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We're going to go back to Mr. Walsh for the next question. What do you see as the biggest issue that faces Pinal County today from a criminal justice perspective?
Well, I think the biggest issue, there's several. First of all, I think that we have to make sure that we continue to protect, as we have been able to do somewhat successfully, from the violence that would spill over from crimes coming from the cartels that are importing drugs from Mexico through our county as well as through other parts of Arizona. We need to be vigilant on that. The sheriff's office has led the way on that. We have cooperated where cases have been submitted to us for prosecution, and I think we need to protect our citizens from violence at all cost. We also need to look at the drug issues in this county. We have to look at prescription drug abuse, and we are. We're going to be the pilot county for a new prescription drug initiative, and we're working closely with law enforcement on that. We have to look at the novelty powders, which are not clearly illegal, but certainly are damaging many of our young people. And we have to find ways to help young people avoid drugs and gangs in the future. That's the function of a lot of the RICO donations that we make from our office. We donate to many of the causes and activities that have occurred here in Maricopa, as well as in other parts of the county, that are an effort to make sure that young people have something to do after school, on weekends, in the summertime. Something constructive, something to keep them away from the temptation and the road of drugs and gangs. So those are the issues that I think are very big for crime in Pinal County.
Mr. Voyles, the same question to you. What do you see as the biggest issue that faces Pinal County today from a criminal justice perspective?
Thank you. Number one, absolutely number one, is the 61% of the most violent felons being released back out on our streets. That's the number one problem that we have right now. We have people who, defendants, criminals who know that Pinal County is the place of refuge, that if you get busted here, you get probation. That's the number one problem we have here in Pinal County, by far. Now, this is coming up from both the criminals who know this, as well as the defense attorneys. If you talk to any defense attorney in Maricopa County, or who's practiced down here in Pinal County and Maricopa County, their number one thing is, they say, hey, listen, they tell their clients this, if you want to commit a crime, commit it down in Pinal County because I can get you a good deal down there. They can't do that in Maricopa County. That's the number one problem. Dropping this idea that you get a good plea offer just because you commit a crime here in Pinal County. Two other problems we have, just real briefly, drug smuggling. We are the drug corridor for the entire United States. We have a larger open border with Mexico than any other state in the United States. So we are the drug corridor for the United States. We need to find a way to shut these this drug corridor down. And finally, support victims' rights. Victims are not being supported. We need to go back and return money to them. We need to go back and do more than just send out a letter to them. We need to go out and actually find these victims and let them know what's happened to their cases. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Walsh, 30-second rebuttal from you on the 61%.
61% is not a correct figure. Our best numbers in our office, where we review cases from time to time, is 2/3 of those who are convicted of violent or drug crimes that require mandatory prison sentences are going to prison. The rest are serving either probation, supervised probation, or they spend time in jail. Our streets are not less safe as a result of the work of my office. As far as the victims are concerned, and that just simply happens to be a fact. Mr. Voyles claims that he has done some research. No one's really verified that research. I think Marvin Brown on your city council would say we do get compensation to victims. He's served on our compensation board, and we make a real effort to make sure that victims receive restitution.
Thank you, sir. We're going to move on to the next question. Start with you, Mr. Voyles. Where do you draw the line on which cases to prosecute in light of having a budget and finite resources?
And I'm sorry, the last part of that was what?
Where do you draw a line on which cases to prosecute in light of having a budget and finite resources?
Well, first of all, when you're looking at dangerous crimes, I'm not going to say we don't have the money to prosecute a dangerous crime. We're going to prosecute violent and dangerous crimes. It's just a fact. If that means that we have to work overtime, that means we have to work overtime. I've done it for 9 years. I can do it 4 more. We're going to prosecute those. But the cases that need to be prosecuted are the cases that have a reasonable likelihood of conviction. You look at the ones that are, and flat out blatant truth, you look at the cases that are being turned down right now, and the cases that are being turned down right now, they're looking at them as though they're wanting a perfect case. As a prosecutor, I've never had the perfect case. I've taken some tough cases to trial. And time after time, when I walk into those cases, sometimes you wonder if you're missing that one fact that you really need. Sometimes you have to take a case that you don't necessarily think is the best case. But the idea is to take those, the standard is it more likely than not that a crime's been committed? But in reality, if you take just slightly higher than that, you can sort of drop down from this burden of proof that my opponent's looking for, proof beyond a reasonable doubt on every case, and look for a happy medium. One is a reasonable likelihood of conviction, and charge those. And there's plenty of money to charge those cases.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Walsh, the same question to you. Where would you draw the line on which cases to prosecute in light of having a budget and finite resources?
Well, first of all, you draw the line on which cases to prosecute by prosecuting every case that is submitted to you by law enforcement in which there is a reasonable likelihood of success that you can convict the person who is charged with a crime. Anything short of that is not protecting the citizens and the residents of Pinal County. So that's the line you draw. Now, the next question is, how do you manage your budget to be able to do that? That's an area that my opponent, unfortunately, has no experience. He hasn't managed a budget like the $14 million budget in my office or the budget I helped to manage at the Arizona Attorney General's office, which was several magnitudes larger. You have to take the budget, you have to move your resources within that budget in order to do it. The way we did it in our office was by working with the courts, the sheriff's office, the clerk's office, the probation department, even the public defender's office, to establish a new way to expedite cases without endangering victims or without holding back on accountability of defendants. We called it the early disposition court. By using that court and by clearing up a backlog that existed when I became the county attorney, we are making sure that we review the cases quicker that are brought to us by law enforcement. We are able to review the furthers that Mr. Voyles talked about to make sure that they're being followed up on. And we've been able to prosecute 41% more felonies in the last 5 years because of these efficiencies. So you manage your resources within the budget you're given by the Board of Supervisors, but you don't slack off on the cases you're going to charge when you have a reasonable likelihood of success of convicting somebody.
Sir, we're going to move to a question on Prop 115. This is a proposition that's on the ballot for November, deals with the selection of judges. Mr. Walsh, I want to start with you. What is your stance on Proposition 115 and how judges should be selected for the state of Arizona?
Well, I haven't spent a lot of time reviewing the propositions yet. I just got my ballot, like many of you, the other day. I'm somewhat familiar with the selection of judges in Arizona. We have been on a modified, what's called a modified Missouri plan since 1975. A proposition, is it 115? Moves to change that. I think it will add some political dimensions in the selection that I'm not sure I'm in favor of. That's what I'm going to be looking at when I decide what to do. I'm going to look at the statements of former Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, who is a great advocate for merit selection here and in other states. The two areas that I'm concerned about is that the governor, whatever the governor's party is, seems to have more political sway under Prop 115 than it has been given in the past. And no, don't kid yourself. I mean, the selection of judges, any way you do it, has a political dimension. You just try to diminish it. The other thing is that judges are now going to be required to go before legislative committees when it comes time for their renewal or the time for retention after a certain number of years. I'm not sure after a judge has been judging that I want to see a legislative committee start questioning the judge about his or her decisions. I think that's an interference between the two branches of government. I'm worried about an independent judiciary. We really don't have any precedent for it on the federal level. Judges or candidates can be questioned by the Senate before they're approved, but after they're appointed as judges, legislative and political bodies don't question judges because that would interfere with their independence.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Voyles, the same question to you. Your stance on Prop 115 and how you believe judges in Arizona should be selected.
I'm actually going to be voting yes on 115. I support it. I think that it's not going to add any more political dimension than what is already there. As my opponent just mentioned, there is a political aspect to selecting judges, no matter what method you're going to use or what methodology you decide to choose your judges or justices from. So I'll be voting yes on it.
Thank you, sir. To the next question, we'll go back to you, Mr. Voyles. With current staffing levels, what are the areas under the county office's purview that you believe would get the least attention?
Under my administration?
With current staffing levels, what are the areas that you think would get the least attention? Yes.
that would get the least attention, probably the child support division. That would probably get the least. There's actually and everybody's like, drop their jaw, gosh, we're not going to get our child support. No, that's not what this is saying here. There's actually a branch of government that the state handles where they actually take care of this for us if we'd like them to. So if we want to put our resources and focus our resources into the criminal area, where it should be, because as a county attorney, your legal term is an administrator of justice. Your legal term is a prosecutor. My opponent has never been a prosecutor, so he's built this office up to actually have more civil areas than it has any criminal. The most important thing should be criminal. That's what we do, is prosecution. So to say that it's going to be eliminated, I'd have to get in and look at it to see if it needs to be eliminated and turned over to the state, or if it's something that should be done by the county attorney's office. But out of the 5 divisions, I would say that would be the least important to me right now, because the most important, absolute most important, is to take violent criminals off the street. Thank you.
Mr. Walsh, a question to you. With your current staffing levels, what are the areas of your office's purview that get the least attention?
You know, I don't think I could say that there's an area of the office that gets the least attention. If I understand your question, are you saying should get the least attention or actually does? No, I don't think that's so. I think that because of the budget constraints in the last few years, we have really pared down. We have not expanded the civil division. We have one less lawyer there than we did when I took over 5 years ago. We have not expanded the child support division. We actually have half a less lawyer there because we had a shared lawyer, and we have fewer support staff. And yet they're still collecting $22 million a year for 11,000 families in this county. You cannot turn that over to the state and expect those results. It will not happen. There will not even be an office in Florence or in Pinal County where people who need child support can go for assistance. They will have to go up to Maricopa County or down to Tucson at some great distance and inconvenience to themselves. And if you save the general fund money spent by the county for the child support division, you would be barely able to hire 2 prosecutors and probably could not manage a paralegal or a secretary, because most of that money, about 85% of that money, close to 90% of that money, is coming on a contract through the Department of Economic Security with federal funds to perform this function. So if you want to eliminate that, you're going to hurt a lot of families in Pinal County, and you're not even going to be able to increase any services as far as the criminal division is concerned. This is another example of how my opponent really doesn't understand what kind of office he's running for.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Voyles, a 30-second rebuttal.
Thank you. Actually, when the most important problem is people like Denise Padilla-Shaw, whose body was found dumped in Picacho Lake, murdered because my opponent doesn't know how to prosecute, because we have a person who's never prosecuted a case in his life, and we have a suspect who's out of custody when at age 18 he was prosecuted for attempted first-degree murder, was given prison eventually because he violated probation, went to Maricopa, pulled a gun on his wife with 3 kids, given prison there for 7.5 years, came back down here, and all of that was wiped away and given probation on a crime when he pulled the gun on his uncle last year? I think the problem is the violent offenders.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Walsh, would you like the 30-second rebuttal on that as well?
We've taken this case up in many different things. Mr. Voyles misstates the actual offense that Mr. Shaw was charged with or the recommendations and the charges. I did not assault his uncle with a weapon. The assault recommendation was for a misdemeanor. He was charged with a felony, prohibited possession. We had a no agreements plea, and the probation department recommended probation. The Superior Court judge granted probation, and there was really no violent crime that led to that probation.
We're going to move on to the next question, and Mr. Walsh, we're going to go with you. Talk to us a little bit about what your biggest case was and how it's influenced the rest of your career.
My biggest case? Well, as Mr. Voyles has said correctly, and I've never denied, and I don't think anybody was ever under any misimpression that I have not been a courtroom prosecutor. I will mention a few of the cases that I have been involved in since going into the public law sector in 2003 in the Attorney General's office. In those cases, I will not try to represent that I was in the courtroom, but I was very involved in the administration of justice that concerned those cases. And just to mention a few of those cases, one is the Baptist Hospital case that was tried in the Attorney General's office. I did not go to court, but I worked to make sure that the resources were available to the criminal division of the Attorney General's office. That was a 9-month trial holding accountable those people who defrauded hundreds of investors in the Baptist Hospital. Another case that I was involved in, because I was in the Attorney General's office, was the investigation and prosecution of our former county manager, Stan Griffiths. That case was handled by Rick Romley, who was hired as a special prosecutor by the Pinal County Board of Supervisors. As the Chief Deputy Attorney General, I regularly received reports, along with the Attorney General, of how that case was going and what Mr. Griffiths did. I was very aware of that case when I decided to apply for the job of county attorney. The other case, there's been several cases in our office I'd like to particularly mention, although it was tried in Maricopa County, the case involving the supervisor Fulton Brock's family was charged with some horrendous crimes that had to do with sexual assault of a young man. And we prosecuted 2 of those cases with lawyers from our office, received good results, and I think it is one of the significant cases.
Mr. Voyles, the same question goes to you. What was your biggest case, and how has it influenced the case?
You know, for me to answer what my biggest case was, it makes me think that I'm going to have to forget several other cases that I prosecuted. So it's hard for me to actually pick a case that had the biggest influence on my career. So I'll just pick one, and this is not to minimize a homicide I may be overlooking, or a shooting at a cop I may be overlooking, or some other case. Let me just make sure that's clear first. Here's a case that meant a lot to me, took a lot of work, it was extremely time-consuming, but it was an 18-month-old baby, little girl, who had 19 broken bones, a lacerated liver, a damaged pancreas, and gonorrhea in her eyes. Now, there's only one way you can get that, and I won't go into it. But that was a case that I prosecuted because nobody wanted to stand up for that 18-month-old, little baby. Nobody wanted to stand up for this little girl. The mother didn't want to stand up for her. The father refused to because the father was being charged with it. The mother was actually extradited. She was illegal. She was actually taken back down to Mexico. I actually had to get a visa to bring her back into the United States so that I could get her to testify against her husband, but I had to do that with a threat of arrest. That was the only way I could get her to come in and testify. I actually had her on the stand testifying, putting him at the time frames of every single point that this little girl was being beaten. Every time the symptoms arose, this man was there present with her. Probably one of the biggest cases I had, not the biggest, but one of the biggest ones, had a lot of effect because as an 18-month-old, she couldn't speak for herself. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We're going to get back to you to start, Mr. Voyles. The last question we have before we get into closing arguments, what should the county attorney's office role be in helping rehabilitate offenders?
You know, the county attorney's job in rehabilitating offenders, I think there's a responsibility there that should be worked with along with the probation department, along with the parole office in some instances. Majority of rehabilitating offenders usually comes from the probation office. As a prosecutor in adult crimes, the object is punishment. It's not rehabilitation. In juvenile crimes, it's rehabilitation. So you don't necessarily focus your time on rehabilitating those you prosecute. Unfortunately, that's the way the system's set up. Now, in juvenile crimes, there is a duty to help rehabilitate, and I think there's a strong duty to rehabilitate. In an effort to do that, you actually work closely with the probation officer. In fact, a lot of times, the defendant, the juvenile defendant, will assume that the prosecutor is the one they actually talk to, as opposed to their probation officer or opposed to their defense counsel, when in reality, the prosecutor is the one who will literally prosecute him because so much time is spent with him as a prosecutor. But rehabilitation for a juvenile is mandatory. You have to keep that system going so that it's focused on rehabilitating the juvenile. As for adults, the main focus is actually punishment. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Walsh, the same question to you. What should the county attorney's role and the county attorney's office role be in helping rehabilitate offenders?
Well, our role is not a direct role in the rehabilitation of defendants. I think people realize that. But yet it is an important aspect of what we do, because many of the people that come in and commit crimes are recidivists. They've committed crimes in the past. So anytime we can find a way to see that somebody who's a defendant, especially a first-time offender, is not going to come back and commit crimes, we should try to do it. We have a diversion program, as I think every county attorney's office in the state does, and we have a small percentage of people who qualify as first-time defendants, first-time offenders, usually for property crimes, where the victim of the property crime agrees and law enforcement agrees, where we have a diversion program. It's not very big because a lot of our crimes don't qualify for it. We have a drug court. We had a juvenile drug court in Pinal County, and now we're developing a drug court in Pinal County. This allows, after conviction, opportunities for people who have become addicted to drugs or otherwise have drug-related problems to try and kick that addiction, try to become good citizens, and our prosecutors have participated in that because it helps keep people from coming back to our office. I am also part of the Arizona Prosecuting Attorneys Advisory Council. I'm the head of the Legislative Policy Committee. Our council reviews legislation. And so every year we get a chance to look at what the state is doing with regard to rehabilitation programs. And as a group, we can find those good programs that we think will be effective and support them as prosecutors.
Thank you, sir. We're going to finish with the closing arguments, 3 minutes each, and Mr. Voyles will start with you.
Thank you. Well, thanks for coming. Thank you to in Maricopa and Maricopa Monitor for hosting this. Just real briefly, I never thought I'd see myself in politics. About 8 months of being asked to do this and me saying no, but I finally decided to after I started seeing cases that were being brought to me that demonstrated that you need a prosecutor in the county attorney's office. As my opponent just mentioned, he's never prosecuted a case. Having prosecuted so many felonies, having gone through the process, I understand what it's like. I know that sometimes it's long hours at minimal pay, but you still have to show up for work. You still have to be present. 3 things I want to do. I want to send the violent offenders to prison. I want to stop the smugglers and traffickers from coming through our county, and I want to support the victims' rights. Those are the 3 things that I've said everywhere I go, because those are the 3 things that are important to me. That's what brought me into politics. 61% came from looking at every single case in 2011 and seeing that on the mandatory prison, if there's a mandatory prison charge on the charging complaint, taking that over to the sentencing, if that person got probation, this man right here is the only person who can allow that. Only person who can allow that person to get probation if there's a mandatory charge. 61% of the time it happened. I didn't believe the numbers. I didn't want to believe the numbers because 61% is 2 out of 3 people. So I went back to 2010 and I looked at 2010. 2010 was the exact same way. 2 out of 3 people, in fact, 61.2% in 2011, 61.8% in 2010. I don't like those numbers. Those numbers mean that there's more violent criminals out on the street with us today. That means there's more violent criminals out in our parks today. That means there's more violent criminals walking around with us that shouldn't be here. A prosecutor understands that if you don't implement a policy within your office that mandates what the prosecutors are allowed to plead their cases out to, they'll take the path of least resistance. Or, in the alternative, if they want to be tough on crime, they can't be tough on crime. This is why. Say, for example, I'm a defense attorney, and I come up to Adam and I say, hey, Adam, listen, I want to get my client a probation offer for this kidnapping, holding these 5 defendants at gunpoint with an AK-47. And Adam says, no, I'm going to be tough on crime. And I turn back around to him and I say, you know what? Then I'm going to go to your supervisor. I go to Christian and say, Christian, Adam won't give me probation on this case. Christian says, hey, you know what? If Adam wants to be tough on crime, he can be tough on crime. Then I turn to Christian and I say, listen, here's a case just like this that happened just last year, and this is for real, where 5 individuals were held at gunpoint at AK-47 zip-tied, and they got probation, the equivalent to a misdemeanor. I turn back to Adam, and all of a sudden I get a probation offer. You have to have a policy within your office as a prosecutor. You have to know how to use the legislative statutes to be able to implement that policy. And until there is, we're going to continue to have 61% of the most violent felons back out on our streets. Thank you.
Mr. Walsh, your 3 minutes.
I've been your prosecutor for the last 5 years. I have led an office that has achieved new highs in terms of prosecuting criminals, in terms of collecting child support, in terms of serving victims. I ask you to give me another 5 years, another 4 years to continue that work. 4 will be plenty, believe me. And I ask you to do it because look at the results. Look at the increase in the number of prosecutions. Look at the crime rates. The crime rates aren't a result of Mr. Voyles' research or my research, the result of FBI statistics. They show that crime is down in Pinal County. Violent crime was reduced by 30% in Pinal County over the last 5 years. This is a result we all know. And we all know this because you don't hear other police departments and police officers coming up and police chiefs saying, the county attorney isn't prosecuting violent criminals, the county attorney isn't taking care of people who assault police officers. A lot of this is what a fellow said the other night, a political malarkey. I want you to look at the real results when you go to vote on November 6th. I want you to understand the importance of leadership in an office like this. I compliment Mr. Voyles on his trial record. I compliment him on the case he mentioned. I know, working with the prosecutors in my office, those are the toughest cases, and they require strong advocacy. And we have strong advocates in our office. I hired them. I hire people who are good, strong prosecutors like Mr. Voyles. But not all of them. In fact, most of them don't know how to run an office, don't know how to manage a budget of this size. That's not what their skill set is. That's my skill set. That's why I'm asking you to send me back. We have 150 employees. We have 44 lawyers. 30 of them are prosecutors, 14 are doing other jobs on behalf of the county. We have a $14 million budget. This is something that requires experience and leadership and also independence. I think independence is important because when you work with law enforcement as the prosecutor, as Mr. Voyles said in his opening answer, there are times when you do have to send cases back, and you do have to say there's not enough evidence here. There are times when you say, no, we can't prosecute this case because there just isn't enough evidence. Even when the sheriff and the police departments do a great job, they're not always enough to get the evidence that will satisfy our ethical standards. But we have still been able, by working closely with law enforcement, to increase those prosecutions by 41%, felonies by 41% in the last 5 years, and to see that crime rate go down. We prosecute a higher percentage of cases referred to us by law enforcement because we work closely with them, and we work closely to train them. We have participated in our own training programs as well as ones conducted by the Sheriff's Office. Please look at the results. Please remember to vote on November 6th, and I would appreciate your vote. Thank you very much for hosting this forum, all of you.
Thank you, sir.